Have you ever seen a single moment change 3 lives forever? A poor young woman kneels beside a crying child in the middle of a crowded mall. The little girl is lost, terrified, clutching a worn teddy bear like it's the only friend she has left in the world. No one stops. No one notices. But the woman does. She sits beside the child, wipes away her tears, and promises to help her find her father. What she doesn't know is that the little girl's father is one of the richest men in the city. And when that powerful man finally arrives, the choice this poor woman makes in that moment will change all of their lives in ways none of them could ever imagine. Before we begin, if stories about love, family, sacrifice, and second chances mean something to you, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. These stories are about real emotions and real life lessons, and you won't want to miss the next one. It was a hot July afternoon when Elena Reyes stepped through the automatic doors of Brookside Mall. The blast of cool air from the air conditioning wrapped around her like a blessing. Outside, the heat had been suffocating. The kind that made the pavement shimmer and stuck to your skin like a heavy blanket. Elena exhaled slowly and pushed a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear. Her legs ached. Not just a little tired. The deep, heavy ache that came from working too many hours on your feet. She had just finished 2 back-to-back shifts at the Red Cup Diner the day before. 12 hours of pouring coffee, carrying plates, smiling politely at customers who barely looked up from their phones. But today was different. Today was her one day off. A whole day just for me, she murmured quietly to herself. She adjusted the strap of her worn faux leather bag and walked deeper into the mall. Elena wore simple clothes, light blue t-shirt, old jeans, comfortable sneakers. Nothing fancy. Nothing expensive. But she carried herself with a quiet dignity that money couldn't buy. The mall buzzed with life. Teenagers laughed near the food court. Families walked slowly from store to store. Well-dressed businesspeople rushed past while talking into expensive phones. Elena watched them all with soft curiosity. There was something strange about being surrounded by people and still feeling completely alone. Her eyes drifted upward toward the second floor. A new bookstore had opened there last week. She had been thinking about it all morning. Maybe she would buy a novel. Maybe 2. It wasn't a big thing to most people. But for Elena, small pleasures like that were rare. Every dollar she earned mostly went toward rent, groceries, and helping her younger brother through college. Still, today she allowed herself a little hope. Maybe a book. Maybe a cup of coffee afterward. Maybe just an hour where she didn't have to worry about bills or responsibilities. She stepped onto the escalator and slowly rose toward the second floor. And that's when she heard it. At first, it blended into the noise of the mall. Music playing through the speakers. People talking. Shoes tapping against polished floors. But then it came again. A sound that made Elena freeze mid-step. A child crying. Not the loud, angry cry of a spoiled tantrum. No. This was different. This was the cry of someone who was scared. Lost. The kind of cry Elena knew all too well. Her chest tightened. Slowly she stepped off the escalator and turned her head, scanning the area. Near the decorative fountain in the center of the mall, she saw her. A little girl. Maybe 5 years old. She sat on the edge of the fountain, her small shoulders shaking as quiet sobs escaped her chest. Her blonde curls fell messily across her face. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. And in her arms, she held a small brown teddy bear so tightly it looked like she was afraid someone might take it away. People walked past her. Some glanced briefly. Most didn't even notice. The world kept moving. But Elena couldn't. Something inside her heart pulled hard. She remembered what it felt like to be a scared kid once. She remembered the feeling of being small in a big world where no one seemed to notice your pain. Without thinking about the bookstore, or the coffee, or her peaceful day off. Elena turned around and walked back down the escalator. Step by step, she made her way toward the crying child. When she got closer, she slowed down. The girl's small fingers clutched the teddy bear's worn fur, like it was her only protection. Elena stopped a few feet away and gently crouched down so she wouldn't frighten her. Her voice softened. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said kindly. The little girl looked up. Her eyes were bright blue, but filled with tears. "I can't find my daddy," the child whispered between shaky breaths. Those words hit Elena right in the heart. She quickly glanced around the mall. No frantic parents. No security guards. Just strangers walking by like nothing was wrong. Elena slowly lowered herself to sit beside the girl on the cool marble edge of the fountain. "My name's Elena," she said gently. She gave a small nod toward the teddy bear. "And who's your brave little friend there?" For the first time, the girl's crying slowed. She sniffled and lifted the bear slightly. "This is Mr. Cuddles," she said quietly. Elena smiled warmly. "Well, it's very nice to meet you, Mr. Cuddles." The girl wiped her nose with her sleeve. "My name is Sophie." Elena nodded. "Well, Sophie, don't worry. We're going to find your daddy." The little girl hesitated. Then she asked the question that made Elena's heart ache. "Will you stay with me until he comes back?" Elena didn't hesitate. She held out her pinky finger. "I promise." Sophie slowly hooked her tiny finger around Elena's. And in that moment, neither of them realized that somewhere in the mall, a very rich man was desperately searching for his lost daughter. For a moment, Sophie simply held Elena's pinky finger like it was the strongest promise in the world. Children believed in promises that way. Elena felt the tiny warmth of the girl's hand and something inside her chest softened. She had spent years working long shifts, watching strangers come and go, hearing pieces of their lives without ever being part of them. But this moment felt different. Sophie sniffled again and wiped her cheeks with the sleeve of her dress. "Elena," the little girl said quietly. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think my daddy is scared?" The question caught Elena off guard. She glanced around the busy mall again. People passed by laughing, shopping, carrying bags filled with things they probably didn't even need. Somewhere in this building, a father was searching for his daughter. "Yes," Elena said softly. "I think he probably is." Sophie hugged Mr. Cuddles tighter. "My daddy gets scared when I fall off my bike." Elena smiled gently. "Well then, I bet he's running all over this mall looking for you right now." Sophie looked down at her teddy bear. "Mr. Cuddles got scared too." "Oh yeah." Sophie nodded seriously. "He gets hungry when he's scared." Elena tilted her head, pretending to think very hard about that. "Well, that sounds like a serious problem." Sophie's lips trembled a little. "He likes chocolate ice cream." Elena let out a soft laugh. "Chocolate ice cream, huh?" "With sprinkles," Sophie added firmly. "Of course," Elena said. "Only the best for Mr. Cuddles." For the first time since Elena had seen her, a small smile appeared on Sophie's face. It was a fragile smile, but it was there. Elena slowly stood up and offered her hand. "All right, partner. Let's go find someone who can help us find your dad." Sophie slid off the edge of the fountain and grabbed Elena's hand without hesitation. Her tiny fingers wrapped tightly around Elena's. They started walking toward the information desk near the mall entrance. Sophie walked quietly beside her, occasionally sniffling. After a few steps, the girl looked up again. "Do you have kids?" Elena blinked in surprise. Kids always ask the most honest questions. "No," she said after a moment. "Why not?" Elena chuckled softly. "Well, I guess I haven't found the right person to start a family with." Sophie seemed to think about that answer very seriously. "My mommy went to heaven when I was a baby," she said suddenly. Elena's steps slowed. The words were spoken so simply, like the child had accepted something far bigger than she should ever have had to understand. "Oh, sweetheart," Elena murmured. "My daddy says she was beautiful," Sophie continued. "He says I look like her." Elena knelt down slightly so she could meet the girl's eyes. "I'm sure you do," she said warmly, "because you're a very beautiful little girl." Sophie smiled shyly. "Daddy has her picture on his desk." They resumed walking. Elena could feel the little girl relaxing a bit more with every step. Trust came easily to children. Sometimes easier than it should. They were almost halfway across the mall when suddenly a voice cut through the noise of the crowd. "Sophie!" The voice was loud, desperate, panicked. Both Elena and Sophie stopped. The little girl's eyes widened instantly. "Daddy!" Her hand slipped from Elena's and she turned toward the sound. Across the open floor of the mall, a tall man pushed his way through the crowd. People moved aside as he rushed forward. He wore a dark suit that looked expensive even from a distance, but his neat appearance was completely ruined by the look of fear on his face. His eyes searched the crowd wildly. "Sophie! Daddy!" The little girl ran. Her small legs moved as fast as they could. The man dropped to his knees just in time as Sophie threw herself into his arms. He wrapped both arms around her, holding her so tightly it looked like he was afraid she might disappear. "Oh my God!" he whispered against her hair. His shoulders trembled slightly. For a moment he didn't say anything else. He just held her. Elena stood a few steps away, watching quietly. The mall noise seemed to fade around them. Finally the man pulled back just enough to look at Sophie's face. "Where were you?" he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was looking everywhere." "I'm sorry, Daddy," Sophie sniffled. The man closed his eyes briefly and pulled her into another tight hug. "I told you to stay close." "I saw a stuffed puppy," Sophie explained sadly. The man sighed softly. His voice was still firm, but it carried deep relief. "Don't do that again, okay?" "I won't." After a moment, he lifted Sophie into his arms. That was when his eyes shifted and landed on Elena. They looked at each other for the first time. Up close, Elena noticed the man's eyes were the same crystal blue as Sophie's. There were faint lines around them, signs of stress, sleepless nights, and responsibility. He looked like someone who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. Sophie suddenly pointed at Elena. "She helped me, Daddy." The man looked back at her. "She gave me water," Sophie continued proudly. "And she promised to stay with me until we found you." The man slowly walked toward Elena, still holding Sophie. Up close, Elena could see the exhaustion in his face, but also something else. Gratitude. Deep, genuine gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly. His voice was calm now, but there was still emotion behind it. "Thank you for taking care of her." Elena gave a small, humble smile. "It was nothing." But the man shook his head gently. "No," he said. "It wasn't nothing." For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Then Sophie suddenly lifted her teddy bear. "Mr. Cuddles is still hungry." The man looked confused. Elena laughed softly. "Apparently chocolate ice cream fixes that." The man let out a short laugh. And just like that, the tension left his face. He looked at Elena again. Really looked at her this time. And something thoughtful crossed his expression. "Well," he said slowly, "after a day like today, I think we all deserve some ice cream." Then he paused, and asked a question that surprised even himself. "Would you like to join us?" Elena blinked in surprise. For a moment she wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. The man stood there holding Sophie in his arms, looking at her with a mixture of gratitude and something quieter, something thoughtful. His suit alone probably cost more than Elena made in a month, and suddenly he was asking her to join them for ice cream like they were old friends. Sophie, however, reacted immediately. "Yes," the little girl said excitedly. "Please come." She wiggled in her father's arms until he lowered her to the ground. The moment her feet touched the floor, she grabbed Elena's hand again like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Mr. Cuddles likes you," Sophie added seriously. Elena let out a soft laugh, but inside she felt a strange flutter of nerves. She looked at the man again. Up close, he was even more striking. Not just because of the expensive suit or the polished appearance. There was a quiet strength in the way he carried himself, but also a softness when he looked at his daughter. Still, Elena suddenly became very aware of her faded jeans and simple t-shirt. She shifted her weight slightly. "That's really kind," she said gently. "But you don't have to do that." The man's brow furrowed a little. "I know I don't have to," he said calmly. "I want to." Before Elena could respond, Sophie tugged her hand again. "Please," the little girl said in a dramatic whisper. "Mr. Cuddles is starving." Elena chuckled. "You're using Mr. Cuddles to win your arguments now?" Sophie nodded proudly. "It works." The man let out a quiet laugh. For the first time since Elena had seen him, the tension completely left his face. The laugh made him look younger, lighter somehow. Still, Elena hesitated. She had planned to spend the afternoon quietly browsing books, maybe drinking coffee alone. Ice cream with a wealthy stranger and his daughter definitely hadn't been part of the plan. She cleared her throat softly. "I really should let you two enjoy the day together," she said kindly. "You just found each other again." Sophie's face immediately fell. "But you promised to stay until you found Daddy." Elena crouched down again so they were eye level. "And I did," she said gently. "See? Daddy's right here." Sophie looked between them, clearly thinking hard about the situation. Then she turned to her father. "Daddy," she said in a serious tone. "Yes, Princess. Can she come just for a little bit?" The man watched Elena carefully. He didn't pressure her. He didn't insist. But there was quiet hope in his eyes. Elena noticed it. For some reason, that look made it harder to say no. Finally, she sighed softly. "Just a quick ice cream," she said. Sophie gasped like she had just been given the best news in the world. "Yay!" She jumped and hugged Elena around the waist before running ahead toward the food court. The man shook his head with an amused smile. "She can be very persuasive." "I noticed," Elena replied with a small smile. For a moment they walked side by side behind Sophie. The little girl skipped ahead, holding Mr. Cuddles like a prize. After a few seconds of silence, the man spoke again. "My name is Spencer," he said. "Elena." "I know," he replied. She looked at him, slightly confused. "Sophie told me," he added with a small smile. "Oh." They reached the ice cream stand. Sophie was already pressed against the glass display, staring wide-eyed at the rows of colorful flavors. "Chocolate with sprinkles," she declared immediately. Spencer laughed. "That was fast," Mr. Cuddles decided. Elena stood a step behind them, watching quietly. Spencer pulled out his wallet and ordered the ice cream. When the server handed Sophie the cone, the girl held it carefully like it was something fragile and magical. They found a small table nearby. Sophie sat between them, happily eating her ice cream while occasionally holding the spoon up to Mr. Cuddles. "He likes it," she explained. Spencer leaned back slightly in his chair and watched his daughter. The look on his face was hard to describe. Relief, love, and maybe a little guilt. After a moment he turned to Elena. "Where do you work?" he asked. Elena hesitated, then answered honestly. "Red Cup Diner." Spencer nodded slowly. "The one on 5th and Madison?" She looked surprised. "You know it. I've driven past it." Sophie suddenly perked up. "That's the restaurant with the big pies in the window." Elena laughed. "That's the one. Can we go there someday, Daddy?" Sophie asked. Spencer looked at Elena. "If Miss Elena doesn't mind." "I don't mind," Elena said with a smile. "Wednesday's apple pie is the best." Spencer repeated it quietly, almost like he was storing the information away. "Wednesday. Apple pie." Sophie finished the last bite of her ice cream and wiped chocolate from her chin. "Today was scary," she said suddenly. Spencer's expression changed immediately. He reached over and gently brushed a curl away from her face. "I know," he said softly. "But you were brave." Sophie thought about that. Then she looked at Elena. Elena was brave too. Spencer followed her gaze. His eyes met Elena's again. There was something different in them now. Something deeper than simple gratitude. "You really helped her today," he said quietly. Elena shrugged lightly. She just needed someone to sit with her. Spencer studied her for a moment. Then he said something that surprised even himself. "Most people would have walked right past." Elena looked down at the table. "Maybe," she said softly. Sophie suddenly yawned. A big, dramatic yawn. Spencer chuckled. "I think someone's had enough adventure for one day." Sophie rubbed her eyes. "But Mr. Cuddles still wants ice cream tomorrow." Spencer stood up and lifted her into his arms again. "We'll see what Mr. Cuddles says about that." Then he turned back to Elena. For a moment it looked like he wanted to say something else. Instead he simply extended his hand. "It was really nice meeting you, Elena." She shook his hand. His grip was warm, firm, steady. "You too." Sophie lifted her sleepy head from Spencer's shoulder. "Bye, Elena." "Bye, sweetheart." They started walking away. Elena remained standing by the table, watching them disappear into the crowd. Sophie waved sleepily over her father's shoulder. Elena waved back. Then she turned toward the escalator again. But as she stepped onto it, something strange crossed her mind. She didn't know why. But she had the sudden feeling that this wouldn't be the last time she saw Spencer and Sophie. The escalator carried Elena slowly upward, but her mind was somewhere else. Below her, the crowd moved like a living river of strangers, voices blending together, shopping bags swinging, laughter rising and fading. But all Elena could picture was the little girl with blue eyes, and the man who had held her like the world had almost taken her away. She shook the thought off gently. People crossed paths every day in this city. Little moments happened and then disappeared like footprints in sand. That was life. By the time she reached the second floor, she forced herself to focus on the reason she had come to the mall in the first place. The bookstore. The smell of paper and ink greeted her as she stepped inside. It was quiet there, peaceful, the way bookstores always seem to feel, like time slowed down inside those walls. Elena wandered through the aisles, running her fingers along the spines of novels. For a little while she let herself drift into that small comfort. But every now and then, without meaning to, her thoughts returned to the mall fountain, to a frightened child clutching a teddy bear, and to a pair of blue eyes that had studied her with quiet gratitude. Meanwhile, several miles away, Spencer drove through the city streets in silence. The interior of his BMW was immaculate. Soft beige leather, polished wood panels, quiet luxury in every detail. But none of that mattered to him right now. In the back seat, Sophie sat hugging Mr. Cuddles tightly, her small legs swinging gently above the floor. For several minutes neither of them spoke. Spencer's hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter than necessary. Finally he glanced into the rearview mirror. Sophie was staring out the window. "You okay, princess?" he asked softly. She nodded. "I'm okay." But her voice sounded thoughtful. Spencer cleared his throat. "Sophie, what happened today can't happen again." The words came out carefully, trying not to sound too harsh. "You made me really scared." Sophie looked down at the teddy bear in her lap. "I'm sorry. I know you are." She traced the teddy bear's ear with her finger. "You were busy." The simple words landed harder than Spencer expected. "You're always busy." For a moment he had no response. What could he say? That he had been on a business call worth millions of dollars? That entire companies depended on decisions he made every day? None of that meant anything to a 5-year-old girl. Spencer swallowed. "You're right," he admitted quietly. The admission surprised even him. Sophie looked up at the mirror, her eyes wide. "You're not mad." "No," he said gently. "I'm not mad." A small pause passed between them. Then Sophie spoke again. "Elena wasn't busy." Spencer felt a strange shift in his chest hearing her name. "She stayed with me." "I know." "She gave me water," Sophie continued. "And she talked to Mr. Cuddles like he was real." Spencer smiled faintly. "Did she?" Sophie nodded seriously. "And she promised she wouldn't leave until she found you." Spencer glanced at the mirror again. A stranger had given his daughter something he hadn't. Time. Attention. Presence. The realization sat heavy in his chest. "I want to make her something," Sophie said suddenly. Spencer blinked. "Make her something?" "A drawing." Spencer smiled. "I think she'd like that. Can we take it to her?" The question caught him off guard. He hesitated for just a moment. His schedule was packed. Meetings, calls, travel plans. Always something. But Sophie must have noticed the hesitation. "Please, Daddy," she whispered. The way she said it, soft, hopeful, made something twist inside his heart. Spencer exhaled slowly. "I'll try to find time." Sophie leaned her head against the seat again. "You always say that." Her voice wasn't angry, just honest. And somehow that honesty hurt more than any accusation. The rest of the drive passed in silence. When they finally reached the long driveway of Spencer's estate on the edge of the city, the evening sun was already dipping low in the sky. The large house stood elegant and quiet behind iron gates. It was beautiful, perfectly designed, expensive in ways most people couldn't imagine. And yet, since Rebecca had died 3 years earlier, the place had never truly felt like a home. As Spencer parked the car, the front door opened. Mrs. Miller stepped out quickly, relief flooding her face. "Oh, thank heavens," she said. Sophie hopped out of the car. "I was the one who got lost," she announced proudly. Mrs. Miller placed a hand over her chest. "Well, that gave us quite the scare, young lady." Spencer walked around the car and lifted Sophie into his arms. "We found a helper, though," Sophie explained. "Her name is Elena." Mrs. Miller raised her eyebrows slightly but smiled. "Well, then we owe this Elena a great big thank you." Sophie grinned. "I'm drawing her a picture." Mrs. Miller gently guided Sophie toward the house. "First a bath," she said. "Then dinner. Can I draw after?" Spencer brushed a curl away from Sophie's face. "After your bath." "Okay." She ran inside with Mr. Cuddles bouncing against her shoulder. Spencer stayed outside for a moment longer. He looked at the house, at the quiet windows, at the perfectly trimmed garden. Everything looked exactly the same as it had yesterday. But something felt different. He walked inside and headed straight for his office. The room was large and spotless. His desk held stacks of organized documents. His laptop blinked with unread emails. His phone buzzed with incoming messages. The world of money and power never paused. But tonight, Spencer ignored it. Instead, he turned his chair toward the small framed photograph on the shelf beside him. Rebecca smiled from the picture, holding a 2-year-old Sophie in her arms, both of them glowing with life. Spencer rubbed his eyes tiredly. "I'm messing this up, Becca," he murmured quietly. "I'm losing her." The room answered only with silence. Then there was a gentle knock on the door. "Daddy." Spencer turned. Sophie stood in the doorway wearing pajamas, her hair still damp from her bath. In her hands she held a sheet of paper. "I finished," she said proudly. Spencer smiled. "Well, come show me." She ran across the room and handed him the drawing. 3 stick figures stood under a bright yellow sun. One was small, wearing a purple dress. The other 2 were taller. One looked like a man in a suit. The other had long yellow hair. Next to the little figure was a brown scribble that Spencer assumed was Mr. Cuddles. Spencer studied the drawing carefully. "Who are they?" he asked gently. Sophie pointed. "That's me." Then she pointed to the man. "That's you." Finally she pointed to the 3rd figure. "And that's Elena." Spencer looked at the drawing again. 3 people holding hands under the sun. He felt something tighten quietly in his chest. Then Sophie said something that made him freeze. "We look like a family." Spencer didn't answer right away. He kept looking at the drawing in his hands. 3 figures under a bright yellow sun. One small girl between 2 taller people. Holding hands. Safe. Happy. The kind of picture children draw when the world feels simple and whole. His throat tightened slightly. Sophie waited patiently, her small hands folded behind her back. "Well?" she asked. Spencer cleared his throat softly. "We do," he said quietly. Sophie smiled, satisfied with the answer. "Because Elena made me feel happy when I was sad." The words landed gently, but they carried weight. Spencer leaned back in his chair and studied the drawing again. "Did she?" Sophie nodded. "She talked to Mr. Cuddles." "That sounds very serious." It was. Spencer chuckled faintly, but the smile didn't stay long. He looked at Sophie again. "Were you very scared today?" She thought about it for a moment. "A little. A little." Sophie climbed onto his lap without asking, like she had done since she was a toddler. "Mostly when I couldn't find you." Spencer wrapped an arm around her small shoulders. The scent of baby shampoo lingered in her damp hair. A quiet memory flashed through his mind. Rebecca sitting on the living room floor years ago, braiding those same curls while Sophie giggled. For a moment, the memory hit him like a wave. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Sophie looked up. "For what?" "For being busy." She studied his face with a seriousness that seemed far beyond her 5 years. "It's okay," she said. But then she added quietly, "Sometimes when you're home, you're still busy." The honesty of children had a way of slipping straight past every defense adults built. Spencer didn't try to argue. He simply nodded. "You're right." Sophie leaned her head against his chest again. "Elena, listen to me," she said softly. "That name again. Elena. The young woman with tired eyes and kind patience. The poor diner waitress who had sat beside his lost daughter when nobody else stopped." Spencer looked down at the drawing again. "Do you want to give this to her?" he asked. Sophie's head lifted instantly. "Yes." "Then we'll take it to her." Sophie blinked. "Really? Really?" Her face lit up like a sunrise. Tomorrow. Spencer hesitated slightly. He could already see the emails waiting for him. Meetings stacked back to back. Investors flying in. Schedules packed with expectations. But then he looked down at the drawing again. 3 stick figures. A small child between 2 adults. Holding hands. A family. Yes, he said finally. Tomorrow. Sophie squealed with joy and threw her arms around his neck. You're the best daddy ever. Spencer laughed quietly. Let's not get carried away. After a moment, he carried her upstairs and tucked her into bed. She fell asleep quickly, still hugging Mr. Cuddles and clutching the drawing. Spencer stood beside the bed for a while, watching her breathe. Then he gently took the drawing and folded it carefully. Later that night, the house was quiet. Spencer sat in his office again, the city lights glowing faintly through the window. His secretary's voice came through the phone. Mr. Davis, about tomorrow's lunch meeting with the Japanese investors. Cancel it. There was a pause. Sir. Reschedule it. But they're only in town for. It's important. Another pause. Then a softer response. Of course, Mr. Davis. After the call ended, Spencer placed the drawing on his desk. 3 stick figures smiled up at him. Somewhere across the city, Elena was finishing her shift at the Red Cup Diner. The dinner rush had finally slowed. Coffee machines hissed softly. Plates clattered in the kitchen. Elena wiped down the counter, her feet aching after another long shift. Darlene leaned beside her, watching with curiosity. You look distracted tonight, she said. Do I? Yeah. Elena shrugged. Just tired. Darlene smirked slightly. You meet someone? Elena rolled her eyes. I met a little girl who got lost in the mall. That's not what I meant. Elena grabbed a stack of menus and straightened them. She was sweet, she admitted. Darlene raised an eyebrow. And nothing. You're terrible at lying. Elena sighed. She had a nice dad. Nice. Kind. Darlene laughed. That's suspicious. Elena shook her head. He was just grateful. Darlene leaned closer. Rich. Elena hesitated. Maybe. How rich? I don't know. Darlene grinned. Suit rich. Definitely suit rich. Well, honey, Darlene said, patting her shoulder, those ones don't usually wander into diners like ours. Elena smiled faintly. I doubt I'll ever see him again anyway. Across the city, Spencer stood in front of Sophie's bedroom door. He listened to the quiet sound of her sleeping. Then he walked back to his office and placed the folded drawing into his briefcase. On the front of the paper, Sophie had written something in uneven crayon letters. For Elena. Spencer looked at it for a long moment. Then he closed the briefcase. Because tomorrow. He was going to find the poor woman who had changed his daughter's day. And maybe, without even realizing it, changed his life too. Morning arrived earlier than usual in Spencer's house. 4 years, his mornings had followed the same strict rhythm. A quick shower, a rushed coffee, a glance at financial reports while his driver waited outside. Most days he kissed Sophie on the forehead while she was still asleep, then disappeared before the sun had fully risen. But today was different. Spencer woke before his alarm. For a few seconds he simply lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember why something felt unusual. Then his eyes drifted to the chair beside the bed. His briefcase sat there. And inside it, a folded piece of paper with 3 smiling stick figures under a yellow sun. He exhaled slowly and rubbed his face. Across the hall, a small door creaked open. Tiny footsteps padded along the wooden floor. A moment later Sophie appeared in the doorway of his bedroom. her blonde hair messy from sleep and Mr. Cuddles clutched under one arm. "Daddy." Spencer sat up. "Morning, Princess." She walked into the room and climbed onto the bed beside him. "You didn't leave yet?" "Nope." Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Are you sick?" Spencer laughed. "No." "Then why are you still here?" "Because today we're going somewhere." Sophie blinked. "Where?" He reached for his briefcase, opened it, and pulled out the folded drawing. Sophie gasped. "Elena!" "We're going to take this to her." Her sleepy expression vanished instantly. "You promised." "And I keep my promises." Sophie threw her arms around his neck. "Best day ever." Spencer smiled, though a quiet part of him felt something deeper. He hadn't realized how rarely he had kept those promises before. An hour later, they were in the car heading into the city. Sophie sat in the back seat, humming softly while she held the drawing carefully in both hands. Spencer glanced at her through the mirror. "You're taking good care of that." "It's important." He smiled faintly. "Very important." Traffic moved slowly through the morning streets. Office buildings rose on both sides, glass windows reflecting the pale sunlight. The city was waking up. People rushed to jobs, coffee cups in hand. Spencer had lived inside that rush for years. But today he found himself driving slower than usual. "Daddy." "Yes." "What if Elena isn't there?" "She works at the diner, remember?" "But what if she's not working today?" Spencer thought about it. "Then we'll come back another day." Sophie nodded. "Okay." A few minutes later the bright red sign of the Red Cup Diner came into view. Sophie pressed her face against the window. "There it is." Spencer parked along the street. The diner looked exactly like the kind of place he normally drove past without noticing. Simple building. Red vinyl booths visible through the window. A neon coffee cup sign blinking softly. But today it felt strangely important. They stepped inside together. The smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries filled the air. Conversations hummed around the room. Customers sat in booths, reading newspapers or chatting quietly. Sophie looked around eagerly. "Where is she?" Spencer scanned the diner. Waitresses in red and white uniforms moved between tables carrying trays. Then Sophie suddenly pointed. "There." Spencer followed her finger. Behind the counter, Elena stood pouring coffee into a white mug. Her blonde hair was tied back neatly. The diner uniform looked simple on her, but there was still that same calm kindness in the way she moved. For a moment Spencer simply watched her. Something about the scene felt strangely grounding. Real. Nothing like the polished boardrooms he spent most of his life in. Before he could say anything, Sophie slipped her hand free and ran across the diner. "Elena!" The sudden shout made a few customers look up. Elena turned quickly. For a second she looked confused. Then recognition spread across her face. "Sophie!" The little girl reached her and wrapped her arms around Elena's waist. "You came." Elena laughed softly and knelt down to hug her. "Well, of course you came too," she said warmly. Spencer walked over more slowly. Elena stood up as he approached. Her eyes flickered with surprise. "I didn't expect to see you both again so soon." Sophie held up the drawing proudly. "I made this for you." Elena carefully took the paper and unfolded it. For a moment she simply stared at it. Spencer noticed the slight shimmer in her eyes. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Sophie beamed. "You're in it." "I see that." Elena crouched again and hugged the little girl. "Thank you, sweetheart. I love it." Sophie glanced at Spencer. "She said she would." Spencer chuckled softly. "I'm glad you like it." Elena straightened and looked at him. There was a softness in her expression now. "You didn't have to bring her all the way here for that." "I promised." The words hung in the air for a moment. Elena smiled faintly. "Well, promises matter." Spencer noticed something in her tone, like someone who had learned that lesson the hard way. Behind them, Darlene watched curiously from another table. She leaned toward a nearby waitress. "That the guy?" "Looks like it." Darlene studied Spencer carefully. His expensive suit, polished shoes, confident posture. Then she glanced at Elena. Something protective flickered in her eyes. Meanwhile, Sophie tugged Elena's hand again. "Can we sit?" Elena laughed. "You're the guest today." She led them to a booth by the window. Spencer sat across from her while Sophie slid into the seat beside Elena. Elena grabbed a small notepad. "What can I get you two?" Sophie spoke immediately. "Chocolate pancakes." Spencer raised an eyebrow. That wasn't even on the menu. Elena smiled. "Special request?" Sophie nodded seriously. "For Mr. Cuddles." Elena chuckled. "Well then, Mr. Cuddles deserves the best." She turned toward the kitchen. But before walking away, she glanced back at Spencer. For a brief moment their eyes met again, and something unspoken passed quietly between them. Neither of them understood it yet, but both of them felt it. Emilio's thumb tapped the screen. For a moment the room remained completely still. Then the security footage appeared on his phone, the sound filling the quiet living room through the speaker. He turned the screen so the officers could see it clearly. The video began with the moment Regina walked into the room. Her cold inspection of the furniture. The way she mocked Julieta. The kick of the bucket that spilled soapy water across the floor. The young officer's eyes narrowed slightly as he watched. Then came the moment Regina pressed her heel onto Julieta's hand. The sharp sound of rubber scraping against marble echoed faintly from the phone. Julieta didn't move while the footage played. She simply sat there holding the babies, her gaze lowered as if none of this mattered to her anymore. But the room had changed. Every pair of eyes now fixed on the screen. The footage continued. Noah crawling toward Regina with his toy car. The hopeful smile on the baby's face. And then the shove. The tiny body falling backward. The scream that followed. The young officer inhaled sharply. Sergeant Malone's expression hardened, but this time it wasn't the confidence he had walked in with. The video kept playing. Regina in front of the mirror pulling at her hair. Pinching bruises into her own skin. Tearing her dress. Then smashing the ceramic statue. And finally the phone call. The trembling voice begging the police to come quickly. But the camera showed the calm face behind the performance. When the video ended, Emilio lowered the phone slowly. No one spoke for several seconds. The young officer looked from the phone to Regina. His voice came out tight. "Ma'am, that footage tells a very different story than the one you reported." Regina's face had gone pale. For the first time since the officers arrived, her confidence cracked. That video is edited," she said quickly. "She must have tampered with it somehow." Sergeant Malone shifted slightly, clearly uncomfortable now. But before he could speak, the young officer turned toward him. "Sergeant, we both just watched her stage the entire scene." Malone said nothing. The room felt heavy with quiet truth. Emilio finally looked at Regina. His voice was calm. Too calm. "You hurt my son," he said. Regina shook her head quickly. "It wasn't like that. You shoved him onto a marble floor." The words cut through the room like cold steel. Regina's mouth opened, but no explanation came. Emilio's gaze moved slowly to Julieta. She was still sitting on the floor with the children in her arms, her uniform stained with blood and soap. For a moment he simply watched her. Then he did something no one expected. He walked forward and knelt down. Right there on the marble floor. Right in front of her. The movement stunned everyone in the room. Julieta's eyes lifted slowly, confusion flickering across her face. Emilio spoke quietly. "I'm sorry." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything that had happened. Julieta blinked. "You don't have to." "I do," Emilio said gently. He looked at the babies resting against her chest. "They were safe because of you." His voice softened. "And I almost believed the person who hurt them." For a second Julieta didn't know what to say. She had spent her whole life standing in rooms where powerful people spoke down to her. She had never seen one kneel. Behind them, the young officer cleared his throat. "Sir," he said carefully, "we'll need to file a report on the false emergency call." Regina stepped back slowly. The reality of the situation had finally settled in. The performance was over. The truth was visible to everyone. She grabbed her purse from the table. "I'm leaving," she muttered. No one tried to stop her. Her heels clicked sharply across the marble as she walked out of the room, the sound fading down the hallway until the front door slammed shut behind her. The young officer watched the door for a moment before turning back. "We'll handle the rest," he said. Emilio nodded quietly. Within a few minutes the officers left the mansion as well. The flashing lights outside disappeared down the long driveway. Silence returned to the house. The kind of silence that comes after a storm has passed. Emilio remained kneeling in front of Julieta. The babies had fallen asleep again, their breathing slow and peaceful. He reached out carefully and brushed a small piece of ceramic away from beside her knee. "You're hurt," he said softly. "It's nothing," Julieta replied. But Emilio noticed the way her leg trembled slightly. "Still," he said, "you stayed." Julieta looked down at Noah and Gianna. They needed someone. Her voice was quiet. "My grandmother used to say children don't remember who is rich or poor. They only remember who made them feel safe." Emilio felt something deep in his chest shift. All the power he had built, all the wealth and control he carried in the world outside these walls. None of it mattered in that moment. Because the strongest person in the room wasn't the millionaire who owned the house. It was the poor girl who had sat on the floor and protected his children with nothing but courage. He gently lifted Noah from her arms and held the boy close. Then he looked back at Julieta. "From now on," he said quietly, "this house will remember that too." Julieta's tired eyes filled with quiet relief. Outside the tall windows, the evening light softened across the city skyline. Inside the Verono home, the sound of two sleeping children filled the room with peace again. And in that quiet moment, the most powerful man on the south side of Chicago finally understood something simple and true. Love doesn't come from wealth or status. It comes from the people who stay when everything else falls apart. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing, and tell me in the comments which part of the world you're watching from tonight.